Dr. Langer, in your most recent book, you write that we all already have a potent tool for improving our health, and we may not even know it. What is that tool?
Our minds. Essentially, the subtitle of the book, The Mindful Body, is Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health. And people don't have the vaguest notion, I think, about how much control we can actually exercise over our health, our well-being, simply by changing our minds. But we'll talk about that, right?
Yeah, we will. Well, you talk a lot about mind-body unity, and I think I've heard of the mind-body connection.
Yeah. First of all, in years past, people thought we had a mind and a body. Not always. Descartes gave us mind-body dualism. But let's start with that. The problem, if you conceive of yourself as having a mind and a body, is how do you get from this fuzzy thing called a thought to something material called the body? Now, everybody has had experience with this. You're walking down the street and all of a sudden a leaf blows in your face and you get startled, your blood pressure increases, your pulse rate, and so on, until you see, well, it was just a leaf. All right? Or you see somebody regurgitating on the side of the road and you yourself start to feel sick. My own experience was more dramatic than this. So let me tell you first that The Mindful Body was first written as a memoir. So there are lots of very personal stories in it. Now, and then it became what it is, which is not so dissimilar from the mindfulness book that I wrote many years ago. All right, so I was married when I was obscenely young. Don't ask about the circumstances. Anyway, so I was 19 going on 40. And we went to Paris for our honeymoon. And we go into this restaurant, and I ordered a mixed grill. On the mixed grill was pancreas. Now, I can't figure it out why I thought that now that I was a married woman, I should eat the pancreas. The idea of it made me sick. Okay, but, I was going to do it because, after all, I was now all grown up. So I asked my then husband which of these things was the pancreas. He pointed to one. I ate everything else. I'm a very big eater. I enjoy eating enormously. Now came the moment of truth. Could I eat the pancreas? I start eating it, and I'm literally getting sick, literally. And he's laughing. That wasn't the reason for the divorce. But anyway, he was laughing. I said, why are you laughing? It was so inappropriate. And he said, because that's chicken. You ate the pancreas a long time ago. All right, so I had made myself sick. Now, the other pancreas story I have, and I bet you don't know anybody else who has two pancreas stories, was my mother had breast cancer, and the cancer had metastasized and found itself in the pancreas. And as you probably know, that's the end game. So here she was, the medical world wrote her off. They didn't exercise her limbs, they just assumed she was soon to die. Then magically it was gone. All right. Now how did that happen? So I made myself sick, she made herself well. Spontaneous remissions are probably not as rare as people think. And at any rate, that's what I mean by our control over our bodies. So we take the mind and the body, and if you talk about a connection the way people do, you still have the problem. How are they connected? Still, how do you get from that thought, pancreas, to some physical change? And I say, these are just words. Let's put them back together and see the mind and body as one unit, simply one thing. Now, wherever you put the mind, you're necessarily putting the body, right? Wherever you're putting the body, you're necessarily putting the mind. So we've done lots and lots of fun studies, interesting studies, starting with one that many people know about because they did it so long ago. And this is a famous study. You're saying to yourself, how obnoxious. How can she call one of her own studies famous? And but that's because if you tune in to The Simpsons Go to Havana, they describe the study. So when you've been on The Simpsons, you know you've made it. Yeah. But anyway, so this was a study where we retrofitted a retreat, timeless retreat, so that it seemed like it was 20 years ago. It wasn't quite a Hollywood set because I didn't have the funds for that, but still, everything about it made you think you were stepping back into the past. And we had elderly men live there as if they were their younger selves. So they spoke about past events, for instance, as if they were just unfolding. In a period of less than a week, Their vision improved, their hearing improved, their memory, their strength, and they looked noticeably younger. Um, that was the first test of mind-body unity. And I have so many others. This is a show where you have many women listeners, right?
Right.
So women may be especially interested in the second study we did in this series. So we go to chambermaids. Now, as you know, chambermaids, they're cleaning hotel and motel rooms all day long. So all they're doing is exercise. But they don't see themselves as exercising. They think exercise, according to the Surgeon General, who sits at a desk all day, is what you do after work. Okay, so we simply divide these women into two groups. And one group, we teach them that their work is exercise. We change their minds. Making a bed is like working at this machine at the gym, so on. Okay, so we have two simple groups. One now knows their work is exercise, the other doesn't. We take many, many measures. They're not eating any differently. One group isn't working any harder than the other. Nevertheless, the women who just change their minds and see their work as exercise lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. So the mind is a very powerful thing. And let me tell you that the book is full of these sort of startling findings that all follow from the assumption that mind and body are best seen as a single unit. Go on, you get to ask me a question.
Thank you. So with all of this research, do you apply this to your own life? Do you try to think your way into something or out of something?
Let's take a giant step back. So I've been studying mindfulness for over 45 years. All right. Now, mindfulness, as I study it, I'm going to answer your question. It's just going to take me a minute to get there. So mindfulness, as I study it, has nothing to do with meditation, which is fine. Meditation is a practice. Mindfulness, as I study it, is the very simple process of active noticing. There are two ways to become mindful. One is, you look at things that you think you know and you see you didn't really know them at all, then your attention naturally goes to them. That's bottom up. Or top down is to recognize we don't know anything. Now, I was a straight A student, so for me to say that all of those A's got me into trouble is a very funny sort of thing. But I was at this horse event, and this man asked me, can I watch his horse because he's going to get his horse a hot dog. Now, with all those A's, you can be sure I knew horses don't eat meat, period. He came back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And that's when I realized that everything I think I know could be wrong. All right, uncertainty is the rule. It's not the exception. Everything is always changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. So you can't know. Now, women too often know they don't know. The problem is they think they should know. And if he, for example, whoever he may be, is acting as if he knows, sometimes women just don't engage. Sometimes we, as men as well, will pretend and so on, but definitely feel uncomfortable. What we need to do, because uncertainty is the rule, is make an universal attribution for uncertainty. I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows, rather than a personal attribution. I don't know, but it's knowable. All right. So when I started to think about this, I forgot the original question, but I promise you'll remind me, I'll get back to it. Well, parents, teachers, the world keeps giving us facts. And with these facts, horses don't eat meat. You tend to accept them. And when you don't know, you think you should know and look for more absolutes. But science, for instance, which is the basis of many of our facts, doesn't give us absolutes. Science gives us probabilities, which says if we do a study and we give some horses some meat, most of the horses may not eat meat, but that doesn't mean all of the horses under all circumstances won't eat meat. So what I'm saying is the research says probably. That's translated in textbooks and talks by parents, teachers, journalists, as absolutes. And what that means, though, is it makes everything brand new. Now, let me give you just one more thing, and then we'll go back to whatever that question was, which is if, I do this when I'm giving talks. I'll often start by asking, so I'm asking you, Gillian, how much is 1 + 1? This is the one thing everybody knows around the world. different languages, but everyone knows how much 1 and 1 is. So how much is it?
Two. Mathematicians would say two.
Oh, right. Okay, we're going to say 2 because that's the answer we've been taught. And anybody who's listening to this at this point might think, oh, God, what is the matter with Professor Ellen Langer? But it turns out 1 plus 1 is not always 2. If you add one pile of laundry to one pile of laundry, 1 plus 1 is 1. You add one cloud to one cloud, 1 plus 1 is 1. Somebody sent me one the other day, which is great fun. So if you take one pizza and you put another pizza on top of it, 1 plus 1 is 2. But if you take one lasagna and you put another lasagna on top of it, 1 plus 1 is 1. It's just a bigger lasagna. All right. The point is that in the real world, 1 plus 1 probably doesn't equal 2 as often as it does. Now, if someone comes up to you now and asks you how much is 1 plus 1, you're not going to mindlessly say 2. All of a sudden, you have choices. You can say 2, you can say 1. Actually, if you were using a base 2 number system, you could even say 10. All right. And so the point is that as soon as we accept these absolutes, we become mindless and we give up choices. Now, when we're actively noticing or actively deciding, which of these answers should I give, for example, the neurons are firing. And 45 years of our research shows that that's literally and figuratively enlivening. So we took old people, we made them more mindful, they lived longer.
So you're saying if uncertainty is the rule, then I want to ask you about the illusion of control because you've coined that term in your research. How much control do we actually have over our lives?
Well, I think we have enormous control. And, when I did those illusion of control studies, which set the stage for behavioral economics and all sorts, an understanding that people weren't always rational. I basically would see somebody talking to a slot machine, for example, and think they were irrational. Man, I thought about it a lot more than this. And I've changed my mind entirely. And I think that essentially, people don't have an illusion of control. That's something we tell you that somebody else has. People have a belief that they have control. And one can never be sure that they can't. Now, by having these notions of the things we can do and things that we can't do, we're more tied to the past, right? Because if no one's ever done it, how dare you think you could do it? But when we realize that science can never prove that something can't be done, all science can tell us is what you've tried didn't work. Right. So it's very different. We need to change our understanding from something being uncontrollable to it being indeterminate. Uncontrollable, you'd be foolish to try to control it. Indeterminate, who knows?
So I've heard that when you have trauma in your childhood, you overestimate how much control you have in your life when you're an adult. Have you found that?
No, I don't think that that's what happens. I think if you experience a trauma, you're on the alert to not have to experience it again. And, there's an interesting finding in psychology called confirmation bias, which essentially is if you think that something is going to be, whatever your hypothesis is, you're going to find evidence for it. So if you wanted to say, gee, aren't I wonderful? I want to say, aren't I wonderful? I'm going to look, there's going to be lots of evidence. If I said, aren't I awful? There's going to be lots of evidence. All right. But so what happens is these people are so attuned to interpreting everything in such a way as to be self-protective, they're giving up an active, exciting way of being in the world. Through no fault of their own, but it can be changed. I was talking to somebody about trauma the other day, and as you know, in the mindful body, I talk a lot about attention to symptom variability. And that's a mouthful, but it really means just being mindful, noticing change. And when you have any chronic disease, you tend to expect that it's uncontrollable, not indeterminate, that the symptoms are going to stay the same or just get worse. Nothing moves in only one direction. So the stock market, for instance, when it's going up, it doesn't go straight up. It goes up and it goes down a little, then it goes up. And it's going up when it goes up more than it goes down. Same things with our symptoms. They're always changing. Now, if we noticed when they changed, we'd be able to exert control. And I'm going to get back to trauma in a moment. So, very simple. So, let's say you have some dread disease. I call you periodically and I say, how is the symptom now? Is it better or worse than before? And why? Several things happen. The first, you started off thinking there's nothing you could do about it, just as the person who's gone through this trauma. Second, as soon as you see when I call and there's a time where it's better, well, that feels especially good. Third, once I ask the question, why, now you're doing a mindful search, try to figure out why, and that itself is good for your health. And fourth, I think you're more likely to find a solution if you're looking for it. So we've done this with big diseases, with Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, stroke, arthritis, chronic pain, and all of them find relief in the symptoms by doing this attention to variability. And that's also what the person suffering trauma can do. Things are changing. The feeling you have about the trauma is never exactly the same. Why now is it a little different? And how to take advantage of that.
You mentioned Parkinson's and several other diseases. I want to talk about healing, which personally is what I'm most fascinated about in your work. Because just last year, you published another study that looked at how the perception of time impacts how we heal.
Yes, yes. This was the most recent of the mind-body unity studies. So we take people and we inflict a wound. Not a big wound. I'm not sadistic. And even if I were, the powers that be wouldn't let me do the study. But it's a little wound. And individually, now people are in front of a clock. Unbeknownst to them, for a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, the clock is going half as fast as real time. For a third of the people, the clock is real time. Now, most people think things will heal when they heal. I mean, the body is what the body is. But it turns out that that wound heals based on perceived time, what that clock tells us. We did another study not dissimilar from that. We have people in a sleep lab. They wake up. We screwed around with the clock, so they think they got 2 hours more sleep than they got, or 2 hours fewer, or the amount of sleep they got. And again, cognitive and physical functions follow perceived sleep.
So, what do you think was happening in these patients' bodies to create such a significant change?
Remember, we're not talking about mind-body connection, where we say, okay, here they change their mind, and that's going to lead to this, it's going to lead to this. We're talking about one thing, which doesn't mean that there isn't anything going on under the hood, so to speak. But it's all happening more or less simultaneously rather than sequentially.
What is a healing mindset?
It's difficult for people to fully grasp that because everything we've been taught for our entire lives, it rests on mind-body dualism. But we've gotten an awful lot of traction by seeing it as a single thing. We've affected blood sugar level for diabetics. I mean, lots of findings that are in the mindful body.
Well, I'm glad that you use the words magically because I think some people could look at your work and say this is magical thinking, but it is rooted in science. So that's what I was getting at with the healing mindset. When it comes to your mother, who's 56 years old, diagnosed with cancer, it had metastasized to her pancreas, which is most often terminal, and then this magical thing, as you say, happened. Like, what happened? What is the noticing?
It was kind of bizarre in some sense. Here at that time, I was studying the importance of perceived control. And when I went to be with her, this is when she's in Florida, I more or less took over her life, which was bizarre since I'm writing about it's very important for people to make choices and be in charge of their own lives. And when they do, they also are healthier and live longer. And I wouldn't let anybody in to see her who wasn't uplifting. This one woman, it was strange. She just wandered in. We didn't know her. And she said, Sylvia, my mother's name, let me tell you a story. I had breast cancer also, and they told me I only had 6 months to live. And I went and I spent all my money, and that was 5 years ago, and I'm almost penniless now. All right. So, I went ahead and I bought her fancy golf clubs because I thought that she would think that why would I spend so much money if she wasn't going to get better. But we were so close that she said to herself, this is my mother speaking, thinking to herself, she wants me to think that everything is going to be okay because she bought these. But so it's very hard to know, what things, what actually leads to health, healing in any individual case. We do know that across and the science that we've done, that when we do this attention to symptom variability, people heal. We know that in the early four experiments where we took elderly people, made them more mindful, this active noticing, they live longer. So I've got, it all rests on a lot of science. But the individual case, oh, by the way, spontaneous remissions, nobody knows how to explain them. But the thing is that most people assume that they virtually never occur. And again, we have no way of knowing. That I know lots of people who hate uh, going to hospitals, doctors, or whatever. And, for these people, they could have tumors, then the tumor goes away. There's just no way of knowing. So I'm not suggesting that it's highly likely, but I'm also not sure how likely it is. But the fact that it does exist means that when you're told you have 3 months to live, uh, you should. If it were I would say to the doctor, based on what the evidence, and are those just probabilities? And how similar are those women for who died? How similar are they to me and the life that I lead?
Well, when it comes to mindset, one of the things that you've talked about that I thought was really interesting was that when people go to a doctor's office after they've had cancer and it is in remission, they say, okay, you're in remission. But if I go to a doctor's office
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
say,
This was mind blowing to me.
yeah,
Yeah. So let me tell you the story. So I went to see my friend Eva, and Eva had a terrible case of cancer, an odd kind of cancer. And she just came back from Dana Farber or Bethesda, one of the Harvard hospitals. And I said, "So Eva, how are you?" And she said, "I'm very happy because they told me my cancer is in remission." And then, just as you explained, all of a sudden, wait a second. If I went and I took the exact same test, they'd tell me I don't have cancer. Why is it you have it, but they can't find it anywhere? And, it's not a simple thing that when women are told that cancer is in remission, it's better than told that the cancer is active. But still, then there's a lot of stress, which again, I think is the major killer. And this has been something that has haunted me for decades already. The medical world seems to have a 5 year rule. So if you have breast cancer and then you go into remission, they wait 5 years before they'll tell you the cancer is gone. I can't find evidence for the 5 years. All I know is that's 5 years of worrying, 5 years of not being fully what you might be. So we did a little study where we look at women who see their cancer as in remission, those who see themselves as cured, and 6 months later, those who see themselves as cured are healthier on every measure we took and certainly happier. And think about it. If you have a cold and the cold goes away, you don't see the cold as in remission. Now, if you get another cold, you say, well, this cold is similar to the last one in some ways, because that's why we call it a cold. But just as certainly, each cold is different. It's the same thing with a cancer. You have the cancer, it's gone.
okay, so question for you. As a journalist, I'm a lover of words, and I do think that our words have power. Is there ever any evidence to support my theory, my armchair theory?
That words have power. Oh, I talk about a lot of that in the book. I'm very sensitive to words also. That I have a part of the book where I talk about better than better. Now, I have respect for a lot of my colleagues who start with, oh, people are in a bad place, and then they find ways to make them better, as if that's as good as it gets. So, as with my friend Eva, you know, having cancer in remission was better than not having it, but better yet would be cured. Some of these are kind of fun. I was asked to give a sermon, and I'm not particularly religious. I'm not religious, and also I'm Jewish, so that being in a church giving a sermon is kind of strange. But I say yes to almost everything. So now, what am I going to talk about? I don't know what to talk about. I know very little about religion. I said I'll talk about forgiveness, and I came up with something like the word forgive, right? Something that was almost sacrilegious. Okay, if you ask 10 people, is forgiveness good or bad? What are they going to tell you?
Good.
It's good. Okay. If you ask 10 people, is blame good or bad? What are they going to tell you? It's bad. But that means our forgivers are our blamers. Well, that's wild. Now, do you blame people for good things or bad things? You blame people for bad things. But it turns out things in and of themselves are neither good nor bad. Anything can be understood as good, bad, or neutral. All right. So that means the people who see the world negatively blame and then forgive, which seem to me hardly divine. An alternative, and this is really
Okay, so
important to.
I have a question about this then. And I don't want to cut you off, but I don't want to forget this.
Okay.
So, my grandmother is a Holocaust
You're too young to worry about that.
survivor.
Yeah.
So, my grandmother is a Holocaust survivor. And when I'm in therapy, my therapist will say to me that a lot of my childhood was very stringent because she feels like the trauma from the Holocaust is like every decision is either right or wrong. And really, no decision is right or wrong. And that's what your research shares. Is there any way to unwire my brain from thinking that?
We have so much to talk about and unpack. I'm going to go back to where I was to come back to where you are, okay? Because one of the things that I thought was more important than all of these exciting health findings that I had was the realization that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. That means everything you've done, there was a reason to do it, or else you wouldn't do it. Every time you're judging yourself in a negative way, you're being mindless. Every time you're judging somebody else. So you can say to me, which is perfectly true, Ellen, you are so gullible. It's really pathetic. And then we'll look back in the past and say, my gosh, I really am that gullible. And you're going to try to change me. I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to try to change. I'm never going to succeed. Because going forward, my intention is not to be gullible. It's that I'm trusting. All right. And as long as I value being trusting, I'm going to be seen as gullible. You are so inconsistent, it drives me crazy. But no one is intentionally inconsistent. So, how might we look at that more mindfully, where it makes sense? So, from your perspective, you're flexible. For each and every negative description of our own or somebody else's behavior, there's an equally strong positive version. Okay. Now, and when you realize that, then relationships to yourself and other people just change. That makes decision making, the segue to what you were asking me now, decision making easier, because if you're living in a friendly, supportive world, you don't worry so much, first of all, about what if I make the wrong decision. All right. Now, it's very interesting. So let me give you the one liner first. Then, so if people don't, if this is too complicated, it's easy to read in my book, but to summarize in 2 minutes might not be. Rather than waste your time worrying about making the right decision, what people should be doing is simply make the decision right. Okay, I said to my class, don't make any decisions this week. Flip a coin, use some heuristic. You're going to do the first thing that occurs, whatever it is. Just don't make any decision. And they come back and they had a glorious stress-free week. Right? You know. Now, the reason that this is so powerful is because when you can't make a decision, that means the alternatives are psychologically equivalent. If they weren't equivalent, if I say to you, do you want A or B? I don't know. If I say to you, do you want $10 or $10,000? There's no decision, right? Once the two are spread apart, all right. So we shouldn't be doing cost benefit analyses. Every cost is simultaneously a benefit. If you add them up, it's not going to tell you what to do. Gathering information to help you with decision information is good, but it doesn't help make the decision because there's always another piece of information that could undo. Should I go to Florence or Paris? I don't know. They're both nice cities. Well, I'll start gathering information, and then I find out.
Yeah, but that's sort of like a low cost decision. Like, should I marry Sir Ryan?
Okay, should I get pregnant? Should I have an abortion? Should I have an abortion or not?
Right.
Is that good enough?
Yeah, that's.
Should I, get divorced or not? Should I get married? Should I take? It doesn't matter. It's all the same.
What do you mean it's all the same? Like, if I marry Brian, my life is going to be different than if I marry Justin.
Yes, but the thing is, you can't know how it's going to be different in advance. If you knew that marrying Brian was going to be great and George was going to beat you, there'd be no decision. Of course, you're going to marry the one with whom you're going to have a great life. When you can't make a decision, it's because the alternatives feel the same.
Oh wow.
That's why you can't make the decision. All right. Once you make a decision, now what people don't realize is we make decisions to take action. Once you take the action, the game is over. So as soon as you marry, who is George? I've named him, you did. But as soon as you marry George, you no longer know what it would be like to be with Brian. It's also the case that if you left George at that moment and said, this isn't good, let me try the other relationship, you're not the same person anymore.
Okay, so you talk about mindfulness, but I think it's really interesting that you talk about mindlessness. What is the cost of not being mindful?
For 45 years, we've been doing research where 45 years is a long time, opportunities for to test lots of variables. And we find when you're more mindful, the neurons I told you before you're are active. You live longer, you're healthier, you're happier. People see you as more charismatic. Your relationships are better. Your memory is better. You're more creative. You're a better leader. You're more authentic. Everything that we've tested, just sort of think about it. That why why do something if you're not going to show up for it, right? And again, so being mindful is so easy. All you need to do, you start off knowing you don't know. If you came to see me, you've never been to my house, you don't have to practice being mindful. You'd walk in and you'd say, oh, did she do those paintings? What is that over there? Oh, wonderful furniture. You would just notice naturally. And so what happens is that this act of noticing.
To flex your mindful muscle, then you just have to notice, you're saying.
Yeah, like, I mean, mindfulness is the essence of engagement. Whenever you're having fun, it's because you're being mindful, because you're noticing. And when you think as in the one plus one is, two, or horses don't eat meat, or whatever. I mean, this came to mind, I would bump into a mannequin and I'd say, excuse me. You know, people are talking to machines all the time as if they're people. Mindfulness, it turns out that most of us are mindless almost all the time. We're not there. Now, the thing is, when you're not there, you don't know you're not there. So when people give that homely advice, stop and smell the roses or be in the moment, that's sweet, but it's meaningless because when you're not there, you don't know you're not there. And when you're there, you're there. It's all those times when you become sick or you're unhappy or you're stressed that mindlessness is overwhelming, and that's what we need to change. So, how do you change it? That when you're stressed, you're assuming that something awful is going to happen, something is going to happen, and when it happens, it's going to be awful. And we can't predict. And nothing in and of itself is good, bad, or indifferent. Now, you can say, and some of your listeners might say, what does she know from her ivory tower and whatever? But let's keep in mind, I'm 77 years old, so I've had a very long life. My mother died when I was reasonably young. I was divorced when I was young. I had a major fire that destroyed 80% of what I own. I've been taken by two psychopaths. I mean, I've had a full life, and still, what I'm saying is that your experience is a function of your views. Your views are under your control. If you see it as, oh my God, this is awful, that's the way you'll experience it, and that turns out to be bad for your health. And so, a story I tell in the book is one day I come home at night from having dinner at somebody's house, and my house was up in smoke, and all my neighbors were outside. So this is late in December, so that I wouldn't have to face this alone. The next day, I called the insurance agent, and when he came over the next day, I called him that night. He said this was the first time in his 25 years. This is not bragging; this is just sharing that the damage was worse than the call. Most people, oh my God, and it's not that bad. Here, it was very bad, and but I felt that I had already lost all of this stuff. Throwing my sanity away with it wasn't going to help. Now, let me just take a moment more. All right, so I move into a hotel. I'm a sight to be seen with my two little dogs and what have you. This is around Christmas. Christmas Eve, I go out. I come back, and my room is full of gifts, not from the people who own the hotel, not from the management, but from the so called little people, the chambermaids, the waiters and waitresses who took care of me, the people who parked my car. I tell you, it took years for me to be able to tell the story without it bringing tears to my eyes. Every Christmas, I'm reminded about how good people can be. And I don't remember what I've lost in the fire. So net net, it was positive. And I'm not saying that, when it happened, of course I was scared, of course I was stressed, and so on and so forth. But, when something happens, when you make whatever work for you and you notice the things that are going right, um, it, it tempers whatever those negative things are. And so, I've had a life where um, I don't have to reinterpret things. My first response to it, is positive. Right now, so my internet here is unstable. So if the internet goes out, to you, this might be a big deal. To me, all right, I'll go and I'll start making dinner. It just doesn't matter. So while you're mindless and think that outcomes are in your heads rather than events, you have to kill everybody, go as fast as you can to get something that you think is good, and you have to race as far as you can away from that which is bad. When you're mindful, fine, whatever it is, it will work. It will feel good.
First of all, I've never heard you tell that story, and I really appreciate you sharing it. Um, I love my job because I'm constantly reminded by how good people can be. I get the best of the human spirit every day in their stories. And so I really relate to what you're saying. Earlier, you said, I say yes to almost everything. A person as credentialed and busy as you are, why do you say yes?
Because there's always a good reason to say yes, and I imagine the person, and I know they'll be happier with a yes. Since I've been invited to do so many podcasts now, what I do is a cop out. I send it to my agent to decide should I do it or not. So I let him be the bad guy. But I say yes to most things. And I'm happy about it. It's sort of, you can go to the party or not go to the party that you're invited to. If you go to the party, it's going to work for you. You're going to have some fun there, and then it's going to seem like it was a good decision.
Okay, I have a few rapid fire questions for you, and then you're done with me.
I don't want to be done with you. This is fun.
You're super kind. What's something that you've changed your mind about this year?
Okay, this is very silly, but Since I tend to be was very fortunate. My parents were wonderfully supportive, which allowed me to just be a happy camper. But when people would invite me for dinner when I was younger, and they'd say, "Is there anything you don't eat?" I thought you have to come up with something, or else they're going to think you're not discriminating. So I would tell them I don't like lima beans. And, I don't know why I felt I should malign the lima bean, but actually they're quite tasty. So that was a recent change.
You talk a lot about stress in your work. You mentioned during this conversation you think it's the killer. What's the single best way to reduce stress? Something we can do today.
I'll tell you several. First, I like these one liners. My friends have this, they write these down and put them on their refrigerator. Next time you're stressed, ask yourself, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? It's almost never a tragedy. I banged the car, I missed the appointment, so what? All right, so then you breathe, and can continue. It's also, if you think back on the times you were stressed, the things we're worried about almost never happen. And if they do happen, we're here to talk about it, which means somehow we were able to deal with it. I think that once we recognize that events don't cause stress, our views of events cause stress, and we're in charge of the views. So when you're stressed about something, you ask yourself, what are all the other reasons, other ways of understanding it? If you're a student and you're afraid you're going to fail the test, what are three reasons you'll do well on the test? How many, it's not really very hard once you simply ask yourself, how might I look at this differently?
So I heard Adam Grant was one of your students. Is that true?
Mm, yes,
Was he a good student?
yes, he was a wonderful student.
Yeah.
And if not, which of course he was a wonderful student, what would be the likelihood that I would share it with you now? But anyway, no, Adam, no, Adam was.
You remember him being an engaged student? Did he ask a lot of questions?
Yeah, no, no, we worked closely together. I thought he was a wonderful find, actually. We did lots of the research on what I was telling you before about behavior makes sense. That came after some similar work with Adam about what I call putting people back in the equation. And this is important for women to understand. It's important for everybody, but all right, everything that is was at one point a decision. Somebody decided how tall the chair should be, where the cabinet should be, what are the rules to tennis, for everything. Now, we take whatever these things are, we take what we're presented with as if that's the way it's supposed to be. And what Adam and I did some research on putting what I call putting people back in the equation. So let's say, you'll like this, from Chicago, I don't know the appropriate analogy, but so let's say you have a sign outside and says, keep off the grass. So most people, unless you're from Chicago or New York, will keep off the grass. Imagine if the sign said, Ellen said, keep off the grass. Then you'd say, who is this Ellen? Maybe she doesn't live there anymore. Maybe I can negotiate with her, and so on. You see, if you want to persuade somebody, you leave people out. You say horses don't eat meat, cigarettes are bad for you, chocolate is bad for you, breastfeed, whatever the current view is. If you said to people that Smith, Walensky, Smith, Walensky, and Kagan did a study that showed that breastfeeding is better for most of the babies being tested. All right, you would be less likely to feel you absolutely have to breastfeed. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The larger point, is that when you recognize that everything that is was a decision, for something to be a decision means there was uncertainty. You don't want to lock yourself in. If it doesn't work for you, change it. Everything is mutable. Now, the reason this is important for women, let me go back a little bit. When I lecture, I'll look out and I'll see, is there anybody very tall here? And often there'll be a man, let's say about 6'5". I ask him to come to the stage. So he's 6'5", I'm 5'3". We look totally ridiculous together. He'll put his hand, put your hand up. I put my hand next to his. His hand is 3 inches larger than mine. The simple question is, should we do anything physical the same way? The answer is no. Why is this important for women? The more different you are from the person who wrote the rule, the more important it is for you not to mindlessly follow it. And since the tall white man probably wrote many of these rules, it's more important for those of us not tall white men to see, and so that means when you're learning instructions, you don't hold the racket, the club, whatever it is, the bat this way. You sort of hold it this way, kind of. You may hold it this way. You learn everything conditional. And that means that if you're learning to bring this full circle, how much is one in one? You don't say one in one is two, no matter what you're taught. You say one in one could be two. And that way, alternatives stay lively.
Well said. Okay, Dr. Langer, what is a book that you've read that everybody should read?
The mindful body.
And what is the smartest decision you've ever made?
To study mindfulness. I think that I don't know how one decides that their decisions are smart or not. I think that if you're operating on this world successfully, that means everything you're doing, you're recognizing the advantages in it. Doesn't mean you can't do a 360, 180-degree turn to something else rather. Um, but I don't organize myself in that way. I think I don't evaluate, here are 10 good things I did, 10 bad things. If something happens, and as I said before, things happen, I find a way to take advantage of them and go forward.
I've always struggled with that question because of that exact idea.
Yeah, I mean, but that's not the way too many people live. I mean, people think that what they want is for everything to be perfect, and they don't realize that if let's say you're a golfer, if you got a hole in one every time you swung the golf club, there'd be no game. So, what makes it a game are the challenges. What makes something challenging is that it's not always going to be successful. And recognizing that you don't get as discouraged with setbacks. All they're telling you is that's not the way, and you try another way.
Okay, final question. We have a question everything game. Because you're virtual, you have to tell me when to say stop.
Stop.
Okay. Do you fall in love easily?
Yes, all the time, but I stay in love as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. What do you mean you fall in love all the time?
Well, whatever I'm doing, I love it because I won't do it if I don't enjoy doing it, and all you need to do is actively engage it. So that's falling in love with the food I'm eating, the games I'm playing, the people I'm talking to. And as far as romantic, um, and if I weren't already in love, I'd probably fall in love easily. But I've been in love with the same person for over 30 years, and that seems to work. So I'm going to stay put.
It sounds like you made the choice right.
You know, yes, I made the right choice.
No, no, no. I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Oh, okay, that I made the choice right. Yes,
I'm not saying you made the right choice. I'm saying you made the choice right.
yeah, yes. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Make sure we eliminate that part from
I
our
will.
from the podcast.
Dr. Langer, thank you so much for your time.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it. I love that you lead with your heart, even though your work is completely cerebral.